Welcome to day 3 of finding equivalent fractions. We must understand that before we move on to adding and subtracting fractions, which I thought I'd be able to begin today, but we need a little bit more understanding of this. So if I have the fractions 3/4 and 3/8, finding equivalent fractions, the first step in your notes that you should have is to list the multiples of each of your denominators. Your denominators are 4 and 8. Now, of course, if you have a multiplication chart, you could probably just look at that, and it would make your life much, much easier. But if we go 4, 8, 12, 16, 8, 16, oh look, our common denominator is 8. So make sure you're writing these notes down. Make sure you're writing these notes down. Then, once we have our common denominator, which we have found is 8, we change each of these fractions into something over 8. Now, 3/8 is already over 8, so 3/8 should stay 3/8. We need to change 3/4 into something over 8. And we decided 8 because we listed our multiples and 8 was the first one that showed up in both. You're writing this stuff down, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Then we asked Victoria, what do you multiply by 4 to get 8? 2. Whatever I do to my denominator, I must do the same thing to my numerator. And so my new numerator is, Victoria? 6. So that was the first. Now our second problem that you were asked to do this morning is 11/12 and 1/6. You could use your multiplication chart real easily to look at your multiples of 12 and 6. But just in case you didn't look at it, I would take my two denominators. 6, 12, 18, 12, 24, 36. Oh wait, 12 is my least common denominator. 12 is my least common denominator. Once I know that 12 is my least common denominator, I'm going to change both of these fractions into something over 12. Now this 11/12 is already over 12, so I don't really need to change that. Now I need to change 1/6 into something over 12. Victoria, what do you multiply by 6 to get 12? 6 times what is 12, Victoria? 2. Good. If you multiply your denominator by 2, you have to do the same thing to your numerator, or you change the value, and we can check that just to prove it, because you're like, oh yeah, prove it to me. 1/6 is 2/12. So we could easily prove that. And so if we multiplied 6 times 2 to get 12, we have to multiply 1 times 2 to get 2. So if you don't have that written down, get it written down now, please.
Just wrote that over.
That's what I'm talking about. God bless you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. All right, our next pair of fractions is 1/3. I'm sorry, 1/2 and 3/5. 1/2 and 3/5. Again, If you wanted to, you have a multiplication chart you could always look at. We list our multiples of 2 and 5.
Now we have to do this again.
5, 10, 15, 20, 25. Oh, look. 10. So my least common denominator is 10. My least common denominator is 10. So I need to change 1/2 into something over 10. Need to change 3/5 into something over 10. Jabril, what do I multiply by here to make sure I get 10? 5. So if I multiply my denominator by 5, I must also multiply my numerator by 5. Jabril, what is my new numerator? 5. Evelyn, what do I multiply by 5 to get 10? 2. If I multiply my denominator by 2, I must also multiply my numerator by 2. And Evan, what is my new numerator? 6.
My second pair of notes.
And our last problem that we're looking at to find a common denominator and make them equivalent fractions is 5/7 and 3/5. My denominators are 7 and 5. Again, if I have a multiplication chart, I can just look down my multiplication chart. Reese, what is our least common denominator? 35. Our least common denominator is 35. Yes, ma'am.
What's the difference between the denominator and the least?
Well, so I could take, if you multiply the two numbers together, that's not going to necessarily give you the least common denominator. Like on the first one, 4 and 8, 3/4 and 3/8, or 2/8, or whatever it was, 3/4 and 3/8. If I multiplied 4 times 8 together, I'd get 32. That is a common denominator. And I could add or subtract, but it's not my least common denominator. So you can always multiply the denominators together. That just means you're going to end up having to simplify your answer more. So I take 5/7 and 3/5. I need to change them into something over 35. Natalie, what do I multiply 5/7 by to equal 35? 7 times what's 35? 5. So my new numerator is what, Natalie? 5 times 5 is? 25. Good. And Honeyleth, what do I multiply by here to get 35? 7. And what's my new numerator? 21. So this is something you have to be able to do in order to add and subtract fractions. You have to be able to do this. Boom, shakalaka, peace out, God bless, love you, do something kind, save the bees, subscribe.